morning, folks. Let's get the slides up. Do I need to click forwards? Well, there we go. So I'd love to start this talk with a bit of two-way engagement. And in a moment, I'd love a show of hands. Who in this audience this morning, and don't put your hand straight up, kind of woke up and felt, do I really want to leave the house? And who in this audience thought, do I really have to put pants on today? And who in this audience, calm yourself, I'm waiting for a bunch of hands, I can see some hands ready to go up. And who in this audience just sort of thought, I don't know if I want to be surrounded by hundreds of people. So now this is the moment of truth and honesty. Who felt some version of that this morning? No judgment. Yeah, I can see some. It's amazing how nobody puts their hand up at first, then when one brave person does it, lots of others do it. Well, newsflash, me too. I was like, can I get out of this? Is there any way? And so I guess the first thing I would say is thank you to you for showing up. It energizes me to see you here engaged. Hopefully I'm going to give you as much as I get from you as an audience. I think we all need to kind of immerse ourselves back in the wild, if you like, and push through that temptation to not leave the building and to not put pants on and to do more of these things. So I love that you've turned up. Thank you. So during the last 2.5 years, I attended a ton of talks, did a bunch of them, attended a bunch of them just like you. And unfortunately, they were, digital and on a screen. And I've got to be honest, for the most part, I was a bit underwhelmed. I was a bit sort of unfulfilled. And it was no disrespect to the event organizers or to the speakers, but I found a couple of things. The first was, it felt like I'd already done 9 video meetings in the day, and this was yet another video meeting. And even though it wasn't a meeting, it was an event, it felt like another video meeting because I was staring at that screen and I was fatigued and I was not entirely focused and I was checking my phone. And so it didn't feel great. And then the second thing was, it felt very kind of one way, and like I didn't retain what I'd heard in the session. And some of that's because it was one way, of course. And some of it was because I sort of listened and I was half listening and it went in one ear and I enjoyed it while I was listening to it. But then as soon as I left the room, it was kind of gone. And so I vowed from that moment on that I would make this promise to myself, but also as an act of service for you as the audience, that there would always be at least a couple of tangible takeaways from every one of these talks I do. Otherwise, I've failed. And so whether you're the guy that wants a salad or a big fat burger, whatever you fancy, and let's be honest, some of us always want the big fat burger at times, there's a takeaway, hopefully, in this session for each of you to make it useful for you. So why do I show you this picture? And by the way, backstory to this, I have 2 daughters. My eldest daughter, when she saw this slide, she cringed and was like, Dad, you can't put a picture of yourself up on the screen when you're standing there. That's like the height of egomania. Nobody does that. Well, there's a reason I'm doing it. What you can't see from this picture on your right is that about 2 hours earlier to this picture being taken, I'd just been diagnosed with PTSD. Post-traumatic stress disorder. It's such a great example that whatever you would think I'm saying in this picture or my demeanor, you're probably not going to guess that. And for interest, on the left-hand side of the screen are 2 brain scans. The far left is a brain without PTSD, and the one in between the picture and the other scan is actually my brain with PTSD. Now, why do I tell you this? It's a little bit weird to come to an event and just kind of blurt out your life story. Well, I've been on a kind of change and transformation journey for my whole career, kind of behavioral change, corporate change, transformation. And just prior to COVID, and by the way, PTSD, nothing to do with COVID. But just prior to kind of COVID and this diagnosis, I'd become a little bit cynical about how much we can achieve with change. because there've been so many failures in the kind of corporate setting. It's so hard to change behaviors and get new ways of working embedded. And we've all seen stats like 70% of transformations fail. So I was a bit jaded, right? I was a bit like, can this be done? How many times can I go into a bank and not roll out agile? How many times can I try and embed a culture of innovation and it not stick? And so I had those feelings. And then I had to go on this big personal journey, kind of the biggest journey of my life. You know, it really impacted my marriage, my well-being, my health, my job, my friendships, my relationship with my children. And I had these discoveries through this journey over the last couple of years, thankfully coming out of this in a much better place, that I thought were really applicable to tackling kind of big change and hard change and the resistance that we typically face. And I wanted to share them with you because I thought they're really useful when we're thinking about where we need to go with the future of work and changing how we do things. The first takeaway, because I promise you some takeaways, is an easy, quick one. For me, and think about this from a change perspective, when I was going through this PTSD kind of journey, was having a tribe. And in my case, the tribe was actually really one person, and it wasn't a family member, because to some degree they were judging or trying to kind of wrap cotton wool around me. It was somebody outside, but it was somebody where I could vent, cry, ask silly things, talk about my frustrations. When I'd taken a step backwards, help to get motivated to take the step forwards again. And that was just so important. And we underestimate the value of a tribe, whether it's one person or a team, when we're trying to navigate big changes. And I can see some nodding in the audience. So this QR code takes you to my LinkedIn profile, where if you're embarking upon this kind of change, or you're going through some sort of personal circumstance, not that I'm a therapist, but I'm happy to be somebody's tribe. Now let me talk to you a little bit about the sort of symptoms and the presentation for my PTSD, because what I realized was I need to go on a change journey, and it was this moment where I could let PTSD define me and set my path for the rest of my life, how much I could achieve, limit me to what I was capable of, determine the relationships I would have and, you know, my future to the end of days. But I decided in the end that I wanted to define that moment and come out of it stronger in the best place I could ever be and talk about it and share about it and learn from it. And that's, you know, 2 and a bit years on, thankfully, that feels like that's where I am. And by the way, this is the first time I've spoken about this publicly. And so, how did it present itself? Because if you think about big change and our resistance to it, I think you're going to see similarities. The first was kind of, I stepped back socially. But here's the strange thing about any of these presentations. It wasn't a big dramatic change. It wasn't like I was really social and then the next day I just hid away in a cupboard, right? It was bit by bit by bit. I withdrew from social circles. And so it wasn't easy to spot. I was drinking more. And you know what? I was kind of what I'd call a somewhat unusual drinker in that I didn't drink for months, but then when I drank, I would drink too much and drinks I shouldn't drink, and I become somebody I didn't necessarily want to become. That happened really subtly as well. It wasn't obvious. I stopped exercising. I stopped eating the way that I probably should have ate. And most of all, and this is particularly relevant to corporate change, my internal narrative was in overdrive. And people think with something like PTSD that it's really negative, that it's like, ooh, this is going to be so bad. It wasn't like that at all. Actually, it was in high alert. And I'd walk into a room and it's like I did a mental risk assessment and I was looking for the exits and I was scenario planning everything that would go on so that I was ready for those scenarios. And it was just exhausting, right? And I didn't even know it because it's all going on in here. And I think that's what we do with a lot of change in the workplace, is we have all of these sort of resistances to change and transformation that subtly creep up on us, especially the longer you are in your career, and you don't even know that they're there. And at first, they seem small, but when there's 5 of them, and they're all working in tandem, it can be kind of a big deal. So what did I learn? specifically from PTSD, and I'm going to give you some tips and tricks through my journey. The first, our brains are this amazing thing, right? Like if you think about what we've solved with the human capacity, it's just incredible. Especially if you look at the last couple of years and the journey we've been on, our potential for doing great things is amazing. But our brain can also be kind of sneaky and our worst enemy at times. And I'll give you real world examples of this. I guarantee you that at least half this audience has been on some sort of diet at some time or some kind of health kick. And then you open up the fridge and you've been great all day. Like you've had the salads and the low carb dishes and whatever it is that you're trying to focus on. And then you see the Cadbury's. And we're always like, I'm only going to have 1 cube, right? But it's never 1 cube. It's evil. And it's the same when you're doing, when you're drinking. You say, well, I've just had a tough day. I'm just going to have that 1 glass just to kind of let off some steam. And it's never 1 glass, right? Like you've opened the bottle. Why would it be 1 glass? It's just, and so that's an example of our brain logically knowing that we probably shouldn't do these things, but saying it's good, let's do them anyway. And so we've got to figure out how we kind of trick our brain and how we know that our brain is not necessarily on our sides with driving big change. And it's the same in the workplace. I'm using a very extreme example, but it's the same in the workplace when it comes to our doubts, our bias, our resistance. Our brain isn't rooting for us. Our brain doesn't want you to do that change necessarily. And you've got to know that, and you've got to kind of figure out ways to combat that. And I'm going to give you some examples today. The next was really pleasing for me. As I said, I went into kind of this period with some cynicism around, are human beings really capable of big change? Or is it just that we want our comfort blanket and we want certainty and, we can kind of do incremental change, but we can't necessarily do really big dramatic change? And I came out of this realizing that big change is completely possible. I mean, if you think about it, I was at a stage of not being very well, isolated, not looking after myself, with my relationships and marriage and relationship with my children in jeopardy, and now I'm in the best place I've ever been in my life. Not just okay, but better than I could have ever imagined. So you can't tell me that we can't adopt, that you, not we, let's make it very personal, you can't adopt agile in the workplace, or find a way to figure out hybrid, or change a new process. Like, you can't tell me it's not possible, because there's nothing special about me. I'm just an ordinary guy that decided I was going to lean fully into this change, and there was no way it wasn't going to work, and I was going to do whatever I had to do it. So it is possible. And there's these tips and tricks, and I'm going to share some of them, but I do an entire hour talking about this normally, that we can use, particularly for point 1 around our brain, and just to improve our chances of transformation and change success. But it sounds so obvious, you've got to want it. How often, especially in the corporate setting, have the company said, we're going to roll out agile, or we're going to roll out a new product or a new venture, or we're going to do a new reorg, and you're in the room, but emotionally, like mentally, you've got 1 foot out the door. Like you've got, and I don't mean you're going to leave, but mentally you're not entirely leaned in. Or you're saying your narrative is going, I've seen this story before, this doesn't work, like this is going to be a disaster. This is the 3rd reorg in like 12 months. You think all of these things, and I can see people nodding. The trouble is, that then pulls you away from like really committing to the change. And so what we've got to do is suspend doubt and find a way to say, yeah, I'm not convinced. I think there's a low chance of success, but I'm going to throw myself into it anyway. I'm going to be that person that just suspends it and tries everything to make it work this time. There's a massive difference between the outcomes. So I told you that I'm going to give you takeaways, so I'm now going to give you 5 that are hopefully useful. The first is, and now I'm drawing upon both my PTSD, but also applying that into big change, as I have done in the workplace around innovation, around transformation and new ways of working. The first sounds really obvious. To change, we've got to do some things differently, to really change. But all too often what I found is, you try and adopt the new thing. Let's say it's agile or a new way of working, be innovative. And you focus on the task at hand, learning agile, going on the course to learn about design thinking, the actual task. But what happens is you don't change anything else. And so the minute you hit a speed bump, muscle memory takes you back to like, oh, it doesn't work. Or I'm going to go back to my comfort zone and do the thing I've always done. And so what I found, and I do this a lot in my programs at Google, is how can we change the environment we're in? And this is kind of point one. There's other things, but can we go spend 3 weeks in the Paris office with the team that does this thing really, really well? Change my environment so I'm around a great tribe, people that excel in this. Maybe I need to start doing walking meetings so I get outdoors so that I'm not bugged by the chat pings and the emails that are distracting me all the time, that take me away from getting good at this thing that I'm learning. Maybe we need to spend more time in the office. I have used learning new things as my excuse to get back to the office, to force myself into working in a new way. Or maybe it's the reverse. Maybe it's better that you spend more time at home because you have focus time, but your environment is huge. And we often overlook that. We just try and do the task, design thinking, agile, whatever it is we're trying to do, focusing on employee engagement, you name it. We just focus on the task. We've got to be more holistic about how we approach it for it to stick. Physiology and neural pathways. I talk about this a lot. I teach on this. So physiology is a really fancy word for kind of how you use your body and your breathing, etc. For the longest time, we thought neural pathways were hardwired and fixed. And if somebody said, you're not good at something, you believed you were not good at something. And you told yourself you were not good at that thing. And then you actively avoided it. And so you kind of reaffirmed that neural pathway, and it became really strong that you're not good at that thing. And so suddenly we've got these pathways that just say you suck. But what you have to do is kind of, they're reversible, but you have to kind of change the game. And so physiology is how you can use your body to kind of improve your chances of success around a task. I'll give you 2 examples, one a little extreme. When I was starting my PTSD journey, decided I want to take up running. And I'd not really been a runner before. And so I'm a goal-oriented person, and I wanted something extreme, like something that I could set my mind on that was positive. And so I said, I'm going to run a marathon. And there were no events on at this time, and I sucked at running. And so, I managed to do that. I set about doing it. I focused on doing it to the point where last year I ran 26 half marathons and 4 full marathons. And there were no events on, right? I just went out and did it because it was my thing to get stuck into. And it helped hugely with my positivity, my belief in doing big things, things that I previously thought were impossible. But that's a bit extreme. A more obvious kind of physiological task you can do, you often see people talk about this, where you can just power pose before a big event, before a big meeting, at home in the mirror. And just doing that for a few minutes increases your testosterone by kind of 10, 20%, whether you're a man or a woman. And it decreases your cortisol levels, the stress hormone. And together that's like an accelerant that gives you about a 20, 25% better chance of success tackling that thing that you previously would have been negative around just by spending a few minutes doing this. So it's a huge impact on your ability to achieve the goal. Small and steady wins the race. I see we've got lots of ones on the slide. So we've all read like Tiny Habits, Atomic Habits, etc. And what I learned through my journey is that you have to get anatomical about the steps. So I'll give you a really quick story because they're kind of waving me off. During COVID, I decided that I wanted to do pull-ups. I'd never done a pull-up before in my life, and so I did what every brave person does. I went to the park at night when it was really, really dark, and I tried to pull up on my own, and it was horrific. It was like, terrible. And I was like, I'm never going to be able to do this. I'm not a big guy. I don't do the gym, etc. And I did what everybody then does, and you go to YouTube, Dr. YouTube, and I figured out there's a few steps. You have to train your grip. You then realize that with a pull-up, that it's not actually just doing this. It's like your shoulders have to do something, so you have to train your shoulders. And then you think you're ready for the pull-up. Still wasn't ready for it. Then you have to stand on a step, kind of fully pulled up, and kick the step away, and then slowly lower yourself down. And then that's how you train yourself. But what I learned from that is how granular you have to get with these steps to be able to do these really big things. Rather than just the task, it's like this holistic plan and doing it, everything around it to improve your chances of success. This is super quick. Every change program I do, I say to the people, I want you to do an A4 mind map of the triggers and the things that are going to hold you back and anything that would make you resist this change. And I want you to go and share it with one person, and not your buddy that's going to enable you to carry on resisting, tell you why you can't do things. Share it with somebody that's positive, that's a role model, that's amazing. And keep it personal, but you've got to call it out. You've got to be really intentional about it. And then last but not least on this, role models are everything. I talked about role models at the beginning. Now I'm going to get kicked off in a minute, but I want to do a little experiment here and get us all active. So everybody stand on their feet for a moment. I promise you're not going to do anything weird. Okay, so now what I want you to do is I want you to think of a number between 1 and 3, okay? And if your number is number 1, I want you to put your hands together like this in front of you. Wait for it. And if your number is number 2, I want it to be a little bit apart. And if your number is number 3, I want it to be like hips width apart. So number 1 is right close together, number 2 is a little bit apart, number 3 is kind of further apart. Whenever you're ready, do that. Okay, I will do this. Very good. So I apologize, there was not really any science experiment. 2 things just happened here. The first was, I've already got your physiology going, so you're going to be able to do amazing things. And the second was, I bet my daughter $5 that I could get a standing ovation today when I did this talk. And so, thank you. You can sit now. Have a fantastic day. Enjoy this. Enjoy being out in the wild again. I'll be around, and speak to you all soon. Take care.